What you're about to hear now is just one episode in a bigger series, full of secrets and mystery. If you haven't followed the beginning yet, I advise you to go back to the first parts so you can understand every detail and realize how much more dangerous what's coming is. Are you ready to face what lies beneath the water? In the depths of a dark lake, amid the fog, and on a night history we'll never forget, something appeared, something the human mind cannot comprehend. And now, the world knows nothing. No pictures, no evidence. Only we saw and only we barely survived. We thought the story was over, but we were wrong, because the nightmare hasn't even begun. The Rock of Sacrifice. Sir James said, "The press has always supported the second possibility, especially since the monster never appears in the years when there is no flood. The North Sea is full of mysteries, and it may contain hundreds of creatures like our monster. And what do you think? I'm neutral. Experimentation is the only measure I believe in." I said enthusiastically, "Why don't you set up a net like those used around ports to block enemy submarines, to close off the Caledonian canals?" He replied calmly, "And then? Then we'll know. If the monster doesn't appear again in Loch Ness, it means it's trapped in the terrifying North Sea." He smiled reproachfully and said, "Still as hasty as ever." Then he began to explain what I had missed. This would require a net 2 kilometers long and 290 meters high to block the canal. How could we build it? And how could we halt navigation? Even if we did, it wouldn't prove anything, because if the monster happened to be inside the lake when we placed the net, it would continue appearing as usual, and we'd learn nothing. Think of another solution. I began to think feverishly, but I reached nothing. So I told him that my mind had failed, and he, playing with his pen, said, "Sonar. Ultrasonic waves can monitor the canal entrances without blocking them, and they can study the depths easily and at minimal cost." The Department of Acoustic Physics, under Maggie's supervision and with Bertram White's approval, the canal's director, monitored all 7 canals throughout the flood season using a complex ultrasonic system. And the result? Negative. Only fish passed through the Caledonian Canal. Yet despite that, Nessie appeared again. So what do we conclude? Exactly, that the monster was always there, at the bottom. Then he stood up and began pacing the room, his hands clasped behind his back in that magnificent stance I knew so well. After several minutes of silence, he said to me, "I noticed that the monster's appearances were always around the circumference of a circle whose center lay near Urquhart Castle. Commander R.T. Gold tried to determine the exact center of that circle, and he found it to be a massive rock in the middle of the lake. We secretly explored that rock, carrying some pickaxes, and found human bones, all of them hands and wrists, and a decayed wooden chest that crumbled in our hands when we tried to lift it out. Inside the chest were a strangely shaped necklace, a horn made of ivory, or perhaps from a wild bull, and a piece of leather." I froze in my seat, for the story was beginning to take an incredibly thrilling turn. Personally, I love these kinds of stories, and I imagine many of you share my enthusiasm. Sir James continued speaking, and here is the scroll. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a dirty, decayed piece of parchment covered with faint, crude drawings. Boats, people, and something like a serpent emerging from the water. I didn't understand much of the symbols, nor did I try to strain myself to. Sir James said, "You know that northern Scotland was occupied by Viking and Celtic tribes during the 12th century, in the era of King David, son of Henry I, and afterward." Of course, I didn't know any of that, but I nodded as if it were old, familiar information. Sir James went on solemnly, "We have reason to believe that this manuscript belongs to the Viking tribes, and it depicts a very intriguing story. I'll explain it to you, as we've studied it thoroughly. The first scene depicts angry gods. I believe it to be Odin, the pagan deity of the Vikings. The second scene shows a serpent-like monster with a horse's mane attacking people from the water. The third scene depicts a man blowing a horn near one of the bays. The fourth scene shows a girl chained to a rock, her lower half hanging in the water, and the monster advancing to devour her. On her chest is a distinctive necklace. Notice that the moon is absent in the image. Now we can piece the story together. The Vikings, or perhaps the Celts, used to offer sacrifices to the Loch Ness monster so that it would leave them in peace. believing it to be the wrath of their pagan goddess Odin. The sacrifices were offered on this rock in the form of young virgins bound by chains and wearing the necklace of redemption. Then their priest would stand by Urquhart Bay and blow the horn. The water would stir, and the monster's head would rise from its cave. Imagine how dramatic that scene must have been. Personally, I would never wish to witness such a sight. This happened regularly, according to their religious calendar, which unfortunately I don't know much about. But it allows us to predict it. As time passed, there were no more Vikings, nor Celts. So what was this poor creature to do when it lost its food? It returned to its dark cave, sorrowful, waiting for deliverance, waiting to once again hear the sound of the horn. He invites him to dinner. Over time, the monster learned to eat fish, but it kept circling the sacrificial rock at the same times it was used to, the times when the Vikings used to offer their sacrifices. The taste of beautiful girls remained alive in its memory, and it hoped those days would return again. Then Sir James turned to me and asked, "Do you have any questions?" I cleared my throat and said, "Is it the same Viking monster? I mean, how could a living creature survive from the Viking era until today? Around 8 centuries?" Sir James said, "Perhaps there was more than one, breeding among themselves and passing down to their offspring a vague memory of the sacrificial rock. Or perhaps it is the same monster. That in itself is a scientific phenomenon. Why shouldn't its long life be another one? A turtle can live for 2 centuries. Why couldn't this creature live for 8? I said in confusion, "And the necklace? It must have swallowed it each time." "So how do we explain that?" He said calmly, "They made a new sacrificial necklace each time. It wasn't difficult or costly." I thought for a while, then said with some relief, "Actually, your theory seems consistent, and allow me to add that the Viking ships that roamed the North Sea used to carry on their bows a wooden carving of a monster's head very similar to our image of Nessie, as if they wanted to please Odin, or trick the monster so it wouldn't attack them. It must have been a terrifying sight when the monster rose before their ships in the darkness of the night, amid the dreadful North Sea. I shivered as I imagined the scene and thanked God that I hadn't lived in that time. Sir James said as he gathered his papers, "But I haven't yet told you the most dangerous part. The necklace and the horn were stolen from Commander Gold under mysterious circumstances." "Stolen?" "Yes." Then another thing happened. The monster began to appear at irregular times, meaning someone is using the horn to summon it whenever they wish. And for what purpose? That's what I gave you a hint about last night. Then he added in a low voice, "We visited the rock 2 weeks ago, Maggie and I, and we found 2 chains fixed to the rock, hanging into the water. We pulled the chains to see, and what do you think we found?" I said in terror, "No, don't say it. Yes, as you understood. 2 hands and wrists bound in chains, completely severed. They were what remained of a person devoured entirely by the monster, leaving only the bound part because it couldn't tear it off. And the hands were delicate, which suggests that they belonged to a girl. And in the town, the police were searching for a young blonde woman named Jocelyn, who had disappeared 3 days ago and hadn't been found since. And of course, it doesn't take much intelligence to know where this Jocelyn went." I shouted in disgust, feeling the world spin around me. "Sir James, do you mean that someone has resumed the practice of offering human sacrifices to the Loch Ness monster?" He replied with heavy coldness, "Indeed, and whether this person is a murderer, a madman, or a deranged scientist, the result is the same. He knows exactly what we know. He kidnaps the girl, chains her to the rock, then summons the monster with the horn to send her to Valhalla." I gasped. "How horrible!" Sir James added, his voice taking on an unnecessarily dramatic tone. "The final observation is that this girl was of Swedish descent, meaning her ancestors were among the northern invaders." The basement. Sitting beside Maggie in the living room that evening, I felt an unusual astonishment and limitless admiration for her. This gentle girl, or gentle woman, who still clings to me, hides within her depths a tremendous strength I never imagined she possessed. She knows everything we know, yet she never told me. She runs a massive project monitoring the Caledonia Canal with ultrasonic waves, and yet she hasn't uttered a single word about it. She saw that horrifying scene on the sacrificial rock, and yet she did not collapse. She didn't lose her mind. "You are strange, Miggy, and your mystery surpasses all my capacity for expectation." I said to her, "Why didn't you tell me?" "What your father told me today about the monster," she said cautiously, looking me straight in the eyes. "Well, what exactly did he tell you? How far did he go?" Once again, she impressed me. She was afraid my words were just a trick to make her slip up. Anyway, I started, recklessly, telling her everything Sir James had told me, while she listened in silence without interrupting. Then I asked her reproachfully, "Why didn't you inform the police about what you found on the island? They're far more capable than you of finding the thief who stole the horn and the necklace." She smiled mysteriously and said, "The police will never find the thief, because he left no trace. At least they can watch the rock to prevent another girl from being killed." She lifted her head confidently and said, "You don't understand. We have a goal far greater than all this, so don't make my father regret telling you what you were never meant to know." I sighed in frustration and said, "Fine, this vacation is over and I'll return tomorrow to Edinburgh. I want nothing to do with your suspicious projects," she said tenderly, in a tone I had almost forgotten the taste of. "You promised me you'd stay forever. At least stay with us this week, because my father won't return to Dundee tomorrow." Then she extended her index finger to my chin and added, "Trust us. Trust us." Heh. Silence fell for a few minutes, broken only by the ticking of the clock. I stood up and began pacing the room pensively, walking back and forth until I stopped in front of a grotesque oil painting hanging above the fireplace, depicting a shepherd playing a tune. Love for his beloved. I gazed at the painting for a moment, then turned away, and suddenly remembered something, so I looked at it again. There were faint marks of a hand carefully imprinted on its surface, as though a palm had often pressed that exact spot, until part of the oily layer had melted from sweat and friction. I didn't hesitate. I placed my palm on the same spot and pressed. Suddenly, I felt a mechanical lever move. And despite the rust and age that shrouded everything, the back wall of the fireplace slid aside with a chilling creak, revealing what looked like a well, with steps carved into its wall leading downward. I looked at Maggie questioningly, but her astonishment was genuine and clear. She clearly knew nothing about this secret door. So I said to her, "It's something quite common in Scottish mansions, a secret door leading somewhere." "But does your father know about it?" She shook her head in confusion and said, "I don't know. I only know this castle is full of hidden passages, but I've never seen one before. How foolish. I've spent my whole life wondering about the mystery of that hand painted on the canvas, and I never thought to press it. I doubt any of the servants ever tried either. It's only ever been brushed by a duster, nothing more." I smiled with the pride of a victor, then took off the suit jacket I was wearing, pulled a candle from the candelabrum fixed above the fireplace, and lit it with a match. She said anxiously, "But where do you think you're going?" What you have just heard is only one chapter of a long novel, a journey that has not ended yet, and secrets that have not all been revealed. In the upcoming parts, you will find the truth becoming more mysterious, and the events more thrilling. So be ready, because the story has not spoken its final word yet.